So let me share with you my vision for driving the next generation of safety, and it consists of 3 pillars. First is continuing strong oversight and enforcement that is data-driven. Second is advancing more proactive safety-based programs that identify and eliminate risk well in advance of an accident. And third is ensuring predictable and reliable federal funding for rail in order to improve infrastructure through capital investments and to develop new safety technologies through robust research and development.
Years, especially crude from the Bakken region. In fact, crude oil production in that area has elevated North Dakota to the 2nd largest oil-producing state in the nation. As recently as November of 2013, more than 600,000 barrels per day of oil produced in North Dakota was transported by rail, going from less than 11,000 carloads in 2009 to more than 400,000 in 2013. This increase in crude shipments by rail and recent incidents underscore how important it is to be ever vigilant in protecting local communities and the environment.
In cooperation with the TSB of Canada, we issued recommendations last month related to the Locomotive accident, calling for proper classification of hazardous materials, a review of routes for these trains, and development of comprehensive response plans for worst-case scenario accidents. We believe these recommendations are necessary as hazardous material transportation by rail continues to grow exponentially. For example, crude oil and ethanol transport are both up over 400% since 2005, and many times these products are transported in unit trains, meaning that the trains have on average about 100 loaded tank cars of the same flammable product. That's over 3 million gallons of hazardous material per train.
Passenger and employee safety is the #1 priority for this nation's commuter railroads. Public transportation is one of the safest modes of transportation, and the commuter and passenger rail specifically are among the safest ways to travel. The FRA recently released statistics for the railroad industry, saying that since fiscal year 2004, train accidents and derailments have each declined 47%, and highway rail grade crossing accidents have declined 35%.
The revolution in North American energy development has been made possible by technological breakthroughs and decades-old methods of energy development, which has set this nation on a path to energy security, a concept unthinkable just a few short years ago. The energy policies we choose today will determine if our nation will continue its march towards global energy leadership, a unique and once-in-a-generation opportunity. America's dramatic increase in domestic energy production has fundamentally altered the global energy markets and more broadly the geopolitical landscape for decades to come, all while providing a much-needed boost to our economy.
I want to begin by addressing the elephant in the room on the issue of rail safety, and that is fatigue. Addressing the issue of fatigue could drastically improve safety in the railroad industry. The majority of our locomotive engineers and conductors in freight service work on call 24/7, 365 days a year, and receive as little as an hour and a half notice before they have to go to work for a 12-hour shift.
Under the agreement, tracks in which trains carry large amounts of crude oil will be subject to more frequent track inspections than required by statute or regulation, speed restrictions, required use of advanced braking technologies, and the use of a sophisticated routing model, which we currently use for our most hazardous chemicals, to now use for crude to assess the safest and most secure routes.
And yesterday also DOT issued an emergency order regarding crude oil movement and classification. That order mandates the proper testing conducted with sufficient frequency and quality and classification of petroleum products prior to being offered into transportation. Can you please clarify what's considered sufficient frequency and what quality, sufficient quality would be?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did talk about this executive order or emergency order yesterday when we met, and we specifically left those terms to be determined by the shippers based on their operations. We did not want to say in each and every instance before a shipment occurs that testing needed to occur. It may be that a shipper, if they are a producer, are producing from one play and that play is consistent, and over time the test results would be the same, and another shipper might have a different experience. We are happy to talk further with those shippers who may have questions and need of clarification, but that was the intent.
Thank you. And can you also give us a rough time frame for when you expect to issue the proposed rule for the DOT 111 tank car standards?
Absolutely. I can tell you that the staff of PHMSA and FRA have been in sequestration over the past several weeks drafting the terms of a notice of proposed rulemaking. As you know, we got comments at December 5th of last year. Over 100,000 individuals sent us comments. We are very, very close in our drafting, but there are processes that follow our process within PHMSA.
Some of the stakeholders, they've indicated that they could not get the information on the composition of the crude to inform the first responders so we know what's on the tank cars. Can you tell me what kind of sharing that you have with the other agencies, like, you know, the other stakeholders, whether we're talking about the Department of Transportation or FEMA?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there, Congresswoman. Thank you for the question. The first is we believe we should approach this challenge of safety holistically. So we look at it from prevention to mitigation and then to response. Mm-hmm. The piece I think you're talking about is the mitigation piece in terms of knowing exactly what the test results show, how we use those for classification to make sure we're hauling our product in the appropriate approved package. Mm-hmm. The current regulatory regime requires us to seek a classification. We're under Class 3 as what is a flammable liquid, is the way we classify today. And then we look at boiling point and flash point under the current regulatory regime to decide then which package it goes in, either packaging 1, 2, or 3. And so we provide that testing as an industry. And back to Chairman Denham's question, the emergency order that was issued yesterday from our standpoint actually creates confusion, and part of it goes to the very question you asked. The current regulations require us to test and classify. What we have done as an industry is we put together under our standard setting group the best minds to make and to set a standard, if you will. How often should we test? How do we make sure we're looking at the right issues? Today we're looking at the question of, like I say, flash point and boiling point. Are there other questions that should be considered? This is an approved process where we collaborate with the regulator. We collaborate under this accredited process with anybody who would like to participate. So we welcome all to come join us because these are questions we need to find the answers to and decide, are there other issues we need to look at? The emergency order, unfortunately, says that we need to look at proper testing with sufficient frequency and quality. We don't know what that means.
Yes, the reason for the executive order or the emergency order on yesterday was that we had heard concerns from industry that they were unsure how to respond to our regulations. And we wanted to be clear that we would identify those characteristics of crude that we would want them to test for. And to clarify our existing rules, these are the things that you should be testing for. And the reason why that is so important in this particular area is because ordinarily you have products on a railroad that are being shipped that are known commodities. There may be anhydrous ammonia or liquefied natural gas or chlorine, and they are known commodities. When you talk about petroleum, crude oil, you are talking about something that is an organic product. It's being mined from the earth. When it comes from the earth, we don't know what we're getting. You know that gas comes from the earth, normally occurring radioactive materials come from the earth, oil comes from the earth, sulfur. So before you take something from production and immediately put it into a tank car, you need to know what you have there so you can look characterize it so you can look at our table. We have 9 classifications of materials and determine which one of these 9 is this. Is it a petroleum product that is a flammable liquid? Is it a flammable gas? Is it a corrosive or poisonous product? And then you move on from there to determine.
And they're concerned, they are grateful. They receive training from both our shippers and our railroads, give their members training, but they said one of the things is the continuation and the institutionalized nature of it. They said when chlorine was the big issue, folks came in, gave their firefighters chlorine training, gave them equipment, and then 5 or 6 years later, after that had stopped, most of those firefighters were gone, the equipment was old, and that ended. And their point was, we want to do this, we want the help, we want them to come in, but let's stay consistent with it. So I ask, how do we do that? How do we institutionalize that? And how do we prepare for something that there is no way that the city of La Crosse, Wisconsin, and Winona, Minnesota can prepare in an urban setting like that?
Thank you for asking that question. I am fortunate to have as my deputy a former fire chief. And over the past several weeks, he brought together a group of all of the fire organizations across the country, the International Association of Firefighters, the International Association of Fire Chiefs, the National State Fire Marshals, the U.S. Fire Association, the API, the AAR, and sat them down at the table to say, okay, what is the readiness for response of this across the country? What kind of training do you need to have to be prepared for this? And I think that was a good first step. If you look at the agreement that the Secretary has with AAR, you will see, again, that it's something that the railroads were willing to step up and talk about making sure that there are no gaps along the routes that will be moving these key trains. And finally, we just went out with our hazardous materials emergency responder grants. We have HMEP grants that go to states and to local communities. Ordinarily, they are going on a much more random basis. One of the pieces of that grant program we put into our request for proposal was requests for grants that would address the crude oil issue in communities that have problems. And we're hoping to see a lot of
Ms. Quarterman, and I appreciate, and this is that collaboration. They felt very good about it. The problem we have sometimes, though, is the city of La Crescent was there also, and they said, I happen to know Winona's got a better grant writer because we're smaller. So their concern is we can't just depend on that, and what do we do to our smaller communities that have the same issues? So.
Congressman Waltz, we at the NTSB agree with what you're saying, and we came out last month. One of our 3 recommendations that we issued in conjunction with the Transportation Safety Board of Canada is exactly the issue you're referring to. Many, many, many communities in the United States are not prepared to respond to something the size of Locomotive or Castleton, North Dakota, something like that. So we want that the railroads themselves, not just the communities, but the railroads themselves to be postured by pre-staging equipment, just like they do with the pipeline industry.
That was my follow-up there. And if I could, I'm going to yield back my time, but if Mr. Hamberger could, I would really appreciate it, Chairman, if you would indulge a bit of an answer on that side, because I appreciate that.
Thank you, Congressman. I just to clarify and emphasize that one of the things that we have in our agreement with the Secretary is the first thing you have to do is do an inventory. Every one of our railroads does have an emergency response plan, but it is not in any way coordinated with other members of the industry, and we ought to put that into an inventory, see what's there, see what needs to be done. We cannot anticipate having pre-staged foam along 140,000 miles of right-of-way, but we do have to have some sort of a better coordinated plan, and we're committed to doing that. We also put up $5 million, I say we, my members, put up $5 million to pay for stipends to take up to 1,500 people just this year out to Pueblo, Colorado, Transportation Technology Center, which has an emergency response training center. Working with API, we're going to put together and Transcare a very specific module, training module on crude. We have one on ethanol. We're going to do it on crude. And this is in addition to the 2,000 we normally have each year. This will be another 1,500. We want to make that a long-term plan, so it isn't something that, that runs out. We've talked to FRA.
Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway has made an announcement last week that it was issuing an RFP for the next generation tank car. My question would be, what can you tell us about that, and what does it mean for the transportation of crude by rail?
Well, I think it says a number of things. It says that Burlington Northern Santa Fe, which is the origin carrier of a vast majority of the crude being produced in the United States, is, as our entire industry does, stepping forward and putting their money where their mouth is and saying that we believe that as the origin carrier, there needs to be a safer tank car, even safer than the CPC 1232, and that's the commitment they've made, and we have consensus to use that car.
So in 1991, NTSB identified the 111 car as inadequate. After 20 years of inaction by regulators, first in the Secretary's office and later by PHMSA, AAR, out of frustration, adopted their own standard. Now NTSB says that standard isn't adequate, and you have a number of suggestions on how it should be improved. So are you familiar with the cars BNSF is ordering, because they do exceed that standard, and do they address the concerns you've raised on the new AAR approved model?
Congressman DeFazio, thank you for your question. BNSF has really said that they want to get the next generation cars, but there are no specifications for those cars to my knowledge. But you're right, we've had a long-standing concern about the current regulatory standards for the DOT 111 cars.
Right. But I guess here's my concern. So we're creating a great deal of uncertainty. We know we could make 111s a little safer with the head shields and other things we could do with modifications. We know that the AAR approved version is better than the 111s, even as if they were improved. BNSF, from what I understand, is going to go further with thermal shielding and double walls, and there's an argument over the thickness and all those things. I guess my concern then turns to PHMSA. I mean, PHMSA was created in '04, and it took them until '13 to put out an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, which is the kind of stuff that drives you nuts around here. What is the earliest date that advanced notice of proposed rulemaking could be translated into a final rule, so that we have some certainty, so people know what to order and what the future is for safer cars? What's the earliest date? The chairman asked you a question about this. You couldn't really give us. What's the earliest date if everything went as quickly as you can move it? What's the earliest date at which we could have a standard, new standard?
Let me go back to...
No, just give me that. What is the earliest date? I mean, advance notice, and then proposed rule, and then revised proposed rule, and then more, I mean, what is the earliest date, using whatever extraordinary or emergency procedures are out there, could we have a new approved design standard so people could start building them and be assured that what they're buying and building is going to be, is going to be approved for the next 25 or 30 years life of the car?
The DOT 111 tank car was designed back in the 1960s.
Ma'am, I'm asking a specific question.
I understand you are.
Given your bureaucracy, what is the earliest date at which you could approve a new standard, since NTSB is very specific about what they want to see in that standard? It isn't like this is creating something new. They've said what needs to be improved over what AAR has, and when is the earliest date at which you could have a final rule so people can start buying these things?
I will get to your answering your question.
Well, we've got 2 minutes. Go.
Okay,
quick.
thank you. Beginning in 2011, PHMSA, FRA, the department worked very closely with AAR in their Tank Car Standards Committee, looking at a new generation tank car as well as other operational fixes for highly flammable crude.
Right.
As
Okay.
you've heard from the NTSB and also AAR itself, PHMSA and DOT and FAR at the time did not think that that standard was adequate, which is why we went forward with an advance notice of proposed rulemaking.
Okay.
During the process of putting out the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, we continued to get comments and petitions, and that continued to drag out the advance notice of proposed rulemaking.
Okay, fine. So
even today, you hear from
okay, but I'm going to just stop you there, ma'am. I'm going to reclaim my time because you're not going to answer my question.
I will answer your
ma'am,
question.
just suspend, please. Look, The problem is we could make the existing cars safer. We're not requiring that. We could, we could condone the existing new design and say if you buy that, you can use it for the next 30 years. We could look at what NTSB has proposed as a design and put that out there. We could have some certainty. Right now, there's so much uncertainty. People aren't going to make the investments in safer cars, and we're going to keep running these crummy 111s as they are and killing people. So the bottom line is, how quickly can you have a new design? Period. Answer, please. You get 30 seconds.
The companies, as you heard, are making investments, and we appreciate the fact that they are making those investments, but we need to get this right, which means we need to hear the comments from all the parties involved and all the improvements.
Okay, but if you set a deadline, ma'am, set a deadline. What is the earliest deadline you can set?
I can tell you when I could get the rule done, but I cannot tell you when everybody else.
Well, you close comments. You say, we're done with comments. We're going to come up with a design.
Well, we are done with the comments. As I mentioned earlier, we are drafting the rule as we speak. The process for rulemaking, once it leaves my shop and FRA's shop, is another 120 days at a minimum.
Thank you. Finally.
AAR, NTSB, safety advocates, and numerous lawmakers, including myself, have called for retrofit or phase out of the older tank cars. Are you considering such a requirement? And I'd like to get back to, when will that be done?
We are in the middle of a rulemaking process, and yes, that is one of the things that is being considered. On the tank car itself, I want to be sure that I make this point about the importance of having a comprehensive solution here. The reason that I and almost every witness at this table talk about the different elements of a comprehensive plan is it's so important. First, we need to prevent derailments. Getting a new tank car is not a silver bullet. Tank cars are designed for normal operating conditions. That means moving around in the yard, going from sidings. They are not built to withstand 40, 50, 60 mile per hour derailments. So this is just one piece of the mitigative puzzle that we have to put together to ensure the safety of these trains.
Is it possible right now, is there a way that first responders can readily access what is on a particular train? I hear different stories. I hear that on some trains there's just a paper manifest. I hear, my assumption from what I'm hearing, it varies by railroad.
There is a paper consist that the crew has in the head end of the locomotive. There is also a 1-800 number that emergency responders are provided to call the railroad. But we are working on, to your point, an electronic consist that an emergency responder could get right away over the internet, and we hope to have that developed by mid-year.
Mr. Szabo, I wanted to follow up on PTC. First of all, are any of the Class 1 freights going to meet the PTC deadline?
No. Certainly, most of them will reach some portion of deployment. BNSF is probably the furthest along, but I'm not aware of any Class 1 that will meet full deployment.
And why not? What are the major obstacles that are delaying them? Basically,
our report to Congress almost 2 years ago now clearly articulated the technological programmatic challenges that the industry faces in full deployment. And that's the point I want to make. The industry can and should continue to be both pressed and encouraged to deploy as far as possible, as quickly as possible. And I really think that it's important that Congress do give my agency the tools that we need for provisional certification of these implementation plans. Because right now, all we're authorized to do under the law that is given to us is to say yes or no on that implementation plan. And we're required essentially to say no if it doesn't adhere to full deployment in that 2015 deadline. So we need some additional tools.
And what obstacles are the FCC presenting?
It's significant and very concerning. We engaged with them again last month. So we're certainly doing our job in making them understand how important this is to the public. This is about public safety, how important it is to the industry, how important it is to my agency, and you know, continue to file comments with them to again heighten the importance of timely deployment. So that's one additional obstacle over and above the list that was in our report to Congress.
Well, thank you. I'm going to move to the other end of that spectrum from the catastrophic and then move to the prevention side of things. And Mayor Cabot in La Crescent, Minnesota, has pointed out to me on that Mississippi River crossing, which is not unique, and I understand everyone's going to line up. Everybody has their unique challenges, but that swing bridge there is one of the oldest in the country, one of the oldest crosses in the Mississippi. Its companion road traffic bridge, highway bridge, was closed down for several months. It had catastrophic economic damage because it was the same design as the one in Minnesota. We're very nervous after the I-35W bridge collapsed. The mayor told me that bridge has been struck 5 times in the last 10 years in accidents at the crossing. There is no other options because that's how you get across the river. And my question to all of you is, I understand you have a lot of these, and each member could bring up one of these things, but my mayor is saying, you know, we're going to prepare for things, we want to do this, but really the thing you could do is make sure this bridge is not 90 years old and gets there. How is that play out? What's the role of rail infrastructure investments that are being made? What's the role of our state rail plan, which it's on there, but as they tell me, so are some other things. How do we address and how are those being laid out in terms of priorities for what they are? Because my fear is down there, the life and limb and all that. But if you get a catastrophic derailment on that bridge, you shut down the Mississippi River, you'll find out how quickly the economic numbers will go out the roof, as that's the major grain port and things being shipped. So I'll leave it to the experts to, how does it work in terms of coming together, and how do we address that piece of it, that this is an infrastructure deficiency that is just waiting for an accident to happen, as my mayor said? So whoever wants it.
I guess I'll go first. I mean, I think 2 things. One, shortly after I came here as administrator, we passed out a regulation that sets up a rather rigorous bridge inspection protocol that all railroads are required to follow, and then we in turn audit their plan to make sure that they're complying, you know, with all aspects of the regulation as well as their own bridge inspection protocol. On the capital investment side, if it's a short line in particular, this is a drumbeat that I have been beating inside a lot of Tiger deliberations, particularly for capitally starved short line railroads. You know, track upgrades and bridge upgrades are, you know, very, very difficult improvements for the short lines, and yet they're critically necessary for this last mile delivery. And so, you know, continued support of the Tiger program, and if you're talking about a small railroad, identifying those things and supporting them through a Tiger application is one potential way of helping generate some improvements.
Congressman, you raised exactly the 2 points that Mr. Szabo said was going to be my answer. There is, on the safety side, the requirement that these are inspected and that indeed they will continue to be able to operate safely. And then on the capital investment side, each railroad does make its own decisions as to where the investment is needed based on traffic patterns and other needs. And so I don't know the specifics of that particular bridge, but you know,
what's our responsibility, Mr. Hamberger? I mean, what is the state's responsibility, the federal government's responsibility, the short line railroad itself, as Mr. Szabo kind of laid that out with the Tiger grants and all of that, because I certainly understand that it's critically important. Again, everybody's deficient bridge is the most deficient in their mind. I understand that part. I'm not trying to say that. But what is our role to get these things upgraded and get it fixed? It's in our best interest to do that.
From the public sector side, we must invest in a surface transportation bill. Public sector entities, we're investing $3 billion in PTC. Something has to give. And so we are taking dollars from one place and putting them in another. We have to invest in all the infrastructure. It all has to work together, whether it's the switches, the rail bed, the bridges, all those things have to work together. We need a good surface transportation bill so we can fund that infrastructure and make sure the entire system functions well.
And you've also mentioned on page 2 of your testimony regarding, well, the 600 and counting standards, and I understand you're working on your 601st with regard to classification of crude. Could you explain to me, one, what the project is, and second, can you talk about what you all know about Bakken regarding vapor pressure, and if it's any, at least from your perspective, is it any different? Is it the same? How should communities be thinking about this?
Yeah, let me take the second one first, if I can,
Sure.
Congressman. Bakken oil is comparable to other light crude oils. Now, I know in the media there's been speculation, there's been talk about volatility and other things, but it falls within that range when you test it, and this is what we're hearing back from our members, that it falls within that range of typically what you see from light crudes. Same we're seeing in Texas and elsewhere. The vapor pressure issue is an important one because that's one currently that's not required by the regs to test for purposes of classification. However, the boiling point and the flash point, which we do test for today under regulation, we believe was an indication of volatility because up until about 1990, I believe the regulator used to require a vapor pressure test. So when you look at it today, there has been some news reports that we believe are unfounded, that are not based on good data. If you look at the data today, once again, it shows that that Bakken oil is in that range of vapor pressures that you typically find in a light crude. So again, it's so important that we get to the data, we get to the facts, and away from the speculation to make sure we're treating these commodities, these products.
Well, I just need to say, that's fine. I understand you have some work to do because
absolutely.
You could also say that the Seattle Seahawks are comparable to a boys club team and that they're both football teams.
I would never say that.
Neither would I. And I think that's what folks have the impression that, yes, they're both crude, they're comparable and that they're crude, but there's a wide difference between that crude and this crude.
Well, no, there's not a wide difference.
I'm telling you what people in my community think.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah, that's what I'm telling you.
I understand.
All right.
Now, to the standard setting part, and this is what's most important about where we are today, because we're looking at things like vapor pressure. We're looking holistically at the entire regulatory regime from a standard setting process. The 600-plus standards we've developed, the API was originally established as a standard setting organization. So we have to get accredited. We get audited every 5 years by the American National Standards Institute, which comes in and makes sure that we're transparent in our operations, that we're all inclusive, and that we bring the best minds together to look at these issues. These go well beyond the industry. We've got PHMSA participating in this process. We have academics. We have the railroads and others. So really what we're trying to do is look holistically. We know that we can move 99.99% of the product safely. Our challenge is to move that last piece of risk out of the system so we get to zero incidents, so you can have confidence, your constituents can have confidence. We've done everything we can to have a zero incident system here. So in that process, we go through, we bring in the experts, we look at vapor pressure, we're looking at corrosivity, we're looking at a lot of issues well beyond this. And we expect to come back with a best practice, with a standard that oftentimes is well above what the law requires. And many times, at least in the oil and gas space, we're the most highly quoted standard-setting group on a global scale in the oil and gas space. That's our hope, that's our expectation, with a single focus, safety and improvement in the performance that we're trying to achieve.
And the timeline?
We expect to have that done in 6 months or less.